The Quiet Unraveling of Us, a story of soft goodbyes, silent endings, and the woman who found herself in the stillness after love. Spring came quietly that year. The cherry blossoms bloomed the way they always did, soft, unassuming, spilling over the sidewalks like pink confetti from a celebration I was no longer invited to. People paused beneath the trees to take photos, lovers leaned into each other's shoulders, and children reached toward the petals as they floated down like forgotten wishes. It was beautiful in the way spring always is, gentle, dreamy, and full of lies. Everything around me whispered that life was moving forward, untouched, but something inside me had already stopped. I think I noticed the first signs in winter, before the world thawed, before I admitted to myself that I had begun watching him more than I spoke to him. There was nothing definitive, just fragments. He began coming home later, his greetings more muted, like an echo of the man I used to know. The reasons he gave were always reasonable. Meetings, work dinners, and spontaneous drinks with colleagues that ended with him climbing into bed past midnight, smelling faintly of liquor and something floral that didn't belong to either of us. I didn't question him. Not at first. I told myself I was being paranoid, that relationships evolve, that comfort often looks like distance. I clung to that thought like a buoy in cold water. But then came the subtler betrayals. The way his eyes avoided mine when he spoke, the way he touched my shoulder absent-mindedly, the same way one might pat a dog or straighten a crooked photo frame. I had become something in the background, present but no longer seen. I noticed everything. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his collar on days when he swore he worked late. The restaurant name was saved in his phone, one we had never been to, and the number beneath it I recognized from nothing in our shared life. I called once. I listened to the ring and hung up before it connected. That was enough. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. There was a strange calm that took over me, then a kind of quiet finality, as if something inside me had already given up long before the call. That weekend, I packed a small bag and told him I needed space. I said I needed time to think, to clear my head somewhere quiet. I half expected him to ask me to stay, to fight, to reach for me. But he only nodded and said he understood, and I hated how easy it was for him to let me go. I left the next morning and drove 4 hours to the coast, to the place where I had spent most of my childhood, the sea-weathered house my grandmother left behind. It had sat empty for years, collecting dust and salt in equal measure. The moment I stepped inside, the air smelled like old books, mildew, and memory. Still, it was mine, a place untouched by him. I opened the windows, stripped the old sheets. I scrubbed the kitchen until my hands ached and the tiles shone. Cleaning gave me something to hold on to, something to do that didn't require answers. In the town, little had changed. The bakery still sold the same red bean buns I used to eat after school, and the sea still sang its hollow lullaby against the rocks every night. I started walking again, long morning walks down the path I used to take as a girl. I passed the weathered dock, the fisherman's boat swaying gently, and the boarded-up tea shop that once belonged to a woman with the softest voice I ever knew. For the first time in months, I breathed deeply. The air tasted like rain and salt and something cleaner than my life had been in years. Alone, I began piecing it all together, not just what he had done, but who I had become. I saw how I had folded myself smaller and smaller, how I had ignored the hollowness for so long that it felt normal. It wasn't the affair that shattered me. It was the realization that we had both been walking away from each other in silence. It wasn't betrayal, it was erosion. A slow, quiet breaking, the kind you don't notice until the foundation is gone. He came to visit once, maybe 2 months after I left. He arrived unannounced, standing in the doorway with a bag of groceries and a bouquet of flowers I didn't ask for. He looked thinner, maybe more tired, but not heartbroken. He was still wearing the same cologne, the one I had chosen for him years ago. We sat in the kitchen and drank tea in silence. I remember how the light from the window fell across his face, highlighting the lines near his mouth. I couldn't remember the last time I had really looked at him. He said nothing of her, I didn't ask. When he left, I didn't follow him to the door. I stayed at the table and watched the tea cool in my cup. When I heard the car drive away, I stood, took the flowers, and dropped them into the sink. I let the water run until the petals wilted and bled into the drain. That night, I walked down to the beach barefoot and let the cold tide creep over my ankles. The water numbed my skin, but I stayed until I couldn't feel anything at all. I wanted to be numb. Numbness felt like peace compared to the constant ache I carried. Months earlier, I had found her letters, tucked into a folder in his office, hidden in plain sight. They weren't love letters, not really. They were more like confessions, observations. She wrote about his laugh, about how he always looked tired in the mornings, and how he was gentle in ways that made her feel safe. She wrote about him like he was some kind of tragic hero, someone stuck in the wrong story. I read every word. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I placed them back exactly as I found them, as if disturbing them more than that would give them power over me. But I knew then. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being someone he saw. I had become a convenience, a certainty, a soft silence that asked for nothing and gave everything. And maybe I had allowed it. Maybe in trying so hard to be understanding, to be patient, I had erased myself. I stayed in the seaside town for 6 months. I didn't mark the days. I let them pass like the tide, indifferent and unhurried. I stopped wearing my wedding ring after the 3rd month, not out of anger, but because it felt like a costume. Something meant to signify love, and all it signified now was absence. I placed it in the bottom drawer of the vanity my grandmother once used, the same drawer where she kept letters from my grandfather. The symmetry felt cruel and fitting. I became a quiet fixture in the town. I visited the bookstore by the pier and bought used paperbacks with folded corners. I chatted with the baker, who always gave me an extra bun, saying I looked too thin. I slept with the windows open even when it rained, and I let the cold settle into the house like an old friend. I didn't cry, not once. That surprised me. I had always imagined heartbreak as loud, cinematic, full of screaming and slammed doors. But mine came slowly, like a leak in the roof you ignore until one day the ceiling caves in. He messaged me sometimes. I replied to a few at first with short, polite answers, but over time his messages became less frequent, and then they stopped altogether. I stopped noticing when they did. The first leaf turned yellow near the end of September. I remember standing on the back porch and watching it fall. One leaf, one breath, one moment, and something in me shifted. By November, I returned to Seoul. The apartment still looked like ours, though nothing about it felt like home. His shoes were lined neatly by the door. The scent of him still lingered in the hallway, as if time had been held hostage while I was gone. He greeted me like a colleague at a formal meeting, cordially and carefully. I returned the nod. We weren't angry anymore. We weren't pretending anymore. We were two strangers living parallel lives in the same space. I moved into the study. It was the smallest room in the apartment, but it was mine. I placed my bag in the corner, set my books on the desk, and closed the door each night when I slept. He didn't ask questions. I didn't offer explanations. Over the following weeks, I began preparing quietly. Not for revenge, not even for closure, just for freedom. I closed our joint accounts one by one. I removed my name from the lease. I kept copies of everything, emails, receipts, and screenshots of messages I had never read aloud. I consulted a lawyer. She was kind and thorough and didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. I didn't tell my family, not even my sister. I waited until I was ready not to hurt him but to walk away without looking back. I waited until the quiet inside me felt stronger than the fear. And when I finally filed for divorce, he didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He signed the documents the same way he signed birthday cards, quickly and politely, as if the words had no weight. There was no yelling, no drama, no tears. We simply sat across from each other at the lawyer's office, nodded when needed, and parted ways. I walked out first, and I didn't turn around. The apartment emptied out gradually, like the slow draining of water after a storm. I left behind most of the furniture. We bought the couch together. He picked the dining table because it was modern but warm. The framed photographs we never updated. I packed only what I needed: books, clothes, my grandmother's mirror, and a few keepsakes from a life that no longer belonged to us. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't feel sorrow, just a quiet finality. The new apartment was small and modest. It sat at the edge of the city, close to the river, with a balcony barely large enough for a chair and a few potted plants. But it was mine. The keys felt different in my hand, lighter, as if no one else's name had ever touched them. I bought things slowly. A kettle that whistled. A wooden table with legs slightly uneven. A thick blue blanket I could wrap myself in on cold mornings. I hung sheer curtains and let the sun spill across the floor every afternoon. The space filled with the kind of silence that didn't suffocate. It made room for me. Some days the loneliness clung to the walls like smoke, but other days it felt like freedom. I found myself again in the small rituals, brewing tea with intention, laying my books out by color, sitting on the balcony to watch the evening sky shift from rose to charcoal. I began writing again, not stories, not yet, but fragments, sentences without endings, feelings I hadn't dared to name. They came like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't in a rush to solve. I took up swimming. The pool nearby was quiet in the mornings. I liked the weightlessness of water, the muffled silence beneath the surface. Each stroke was a promise to myself, a way of remembering that my body still belonged to me. In the evenings I read. I ate dinner at the small table. I kept a journal even if most pages stayed blank. I slept with the window open, even when it rained. His name stopped coming to mind so easily. When it did, it was no longer a wound, just a familiar ache, like an old scar that occasionally stung with the weather. He became a part of my past in the way that certain smells or places do, something once tender, now distant. One morning, a friend from the old neighborhood called. She spoke with the hushed excitement of someone who believes they're delivering poetic justice. The woman had left him, she said, moved out of the city. No one knew where. Her tone held the kind of satisfaction people reserve for stories where wrongs are somehow righted. But I felt nothing. I thanked her, folded the laundry, I watered my plants. That evening, I stepped onto the balcony and watched the city surrender to night. The wind tugged at the leaves of my fig tree. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Lights flickered to life one by one, like stars mapping out someone else's story. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I simply existed. Weeks passed, then months. One day I ran into him. It happened by chance, on a Tuesday afternoon, in a bookstore downtown. I was browsing the poetry section. He was standing by the biographies alone, holding a book he never bought. His hair was longer. He looked older. We noticed each other at the same time. There was no panic, no surprise, just stillness. He nodded, I nodded back. And then we turned away. We became two people who had once shared a life, but no longer shared a story. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. I walked out without buying anything. The air outside felt heavier, like the weight of memory had followed me through the doors. But it passed quickly. I didn't see him again. That night I wrote without stopping. Not about him, about the sea, about houses that remember you, about women who leave quietly and still manage to rebuild. I wrote about the version of myself I had once been, the girl who waited for things to fix themselves. The woman folded her questions into silence. I wrote about her because I wanted to forgive her, because she deserved to be remembered, not erased. In the weeks that followed, something began to shift. I painted the walls a pale green. I bought a plant I didn't know how to care for. I attended a writing class on Saturdays. I learned the names of the baristas at the cafe near my apartment. I discovered a rooftop garden 2 streets over and visited it whenever I needed to feel small in a good way. I met people slowly, cautiously. There was a man at the swimming pool who always arrived after me. He nodded once, quietly, and never spoke. I began to anticipate the sound of his footsteps, not out of longing, but because they reminded me that life continued even when it felt like everything had paused. We never exchanged names, but he existed in my days the way music sometimes fills a room. You don't notice it at first, and then suddenly it's there, coloring everything softly. Time passed. I lost count of how long it had been since the divorce. Autumn came again, earlier this time. The leaves turned gold and scarlet. The mornings were sharp with cold. I found myself thinking less about what I had lost and more about what I had survived. One evening, I opened the drawer where I had kept the wedding ring. It still lay there, untouched, tucked beside a bundle of old photographs and letters. I held it in my palm for a long time. It was heavier than I remembered. Strange how something so small could carry so much. I didn't cry, I didn't sigh. I took the ring and walked to the river. The sky was deep blue, the water reflecting the lights of passing cars. I stood at the edge and watched the ripples move like breath. Then I let the ring go. It sank without a sound. There was no epiphany, no sudden lightness, just a quiet moment of release. I turned back toward home. And I kept walking.